There is a strategy so patient, so methodical, and so precisely calibrated to American vulnerabilities that most Western analysts refuse to take it seriously. Not because the evidence for it is thin. The evidence is abundant. Not because the logic is weak. The logic is devastatingly sound. They refuse to take it seriously because accepting it as real requires acknowledging something that contradicts 40 years of American strategic self-understanding. It requires acknowledging that a country Washington has spent 4 decades trying to financially destroy, militarily threaten, and diplomatically isolate has developed a strategy to bankrupt the most powerful economy in human history, without launching a single missile, without firing a single shot, without a single Iranian soldier crossing a single border. The strategy is not secret. Tehran has not hidden its intentions. Iranian military commanders, political leaders, and strategic thinkers have described its components publicly and repeatedly over many years. The problem is not lack of disclosure. The problem is that Washington has consistently interpreted Iranian statements through the lens of a country that is weak, isolated, and desperate. And that interpretation is precisely the misreading that the strategy depends on. Iran is not trying to defeat America in a war. Iran is trying to make America defeat itself. And it has identified with surgical precision the exact pressure points where American power is most fragile, most overextended, and most vulnerable to the kind of sustained, distributed, low-cost pressure that a country of Iran's resources can maintain indefinitely. To understand how this strategy works, you have to begin by understanding what bankruptcy actually means for a superpower. Individual bankruptcy is simple. You spend more than you earn, your debts exceed your assets, and eventually, creditors stop lending and the financial structure collapses. Superpower bankruptcy is more complex but follows the same underlying logic. It happens when the cost of maintaining global commitments exceeds the economic and political capacity to sustain them. When the gap between what the empire promises and what it can actually deliver becomes large enough to undermine the credibility that makes the promises valuable in the first place. When allies start hedging, adversaries start testing, and the domestic population starts asking why so much is being spent abroad while so little is being invested at home. America is already deep inside this process, and Iran did not create the conditions for it, but Iran has developed a strategy to accelerate it with extraordinary efficiency. The strategy operates across 5 distinct dimensions simultaneously. Each dimension imposes costs on American power. Each dimension is designed to be sustainable for Iran indefinitely. And each dimension is calibrated to exploit a specific structural weakness in the American system that exists, regardless of what Iran does. Iran is not creating American vulnerabilities. It is finding them, mapping them, and applying pressure to them with the patience of a country that has survived for 2,500 years and understands that time is a weapon. The first dimension is the cost multiplication strategy in the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf is the single most economically critical waterway on Earth. Roughly 20% of globally traded oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point at the Gulf's entrance that is in some places only 33 kilometers wide. The global economy's dependence on this waterway gives Iran a lever of extraordinary power that requires no offensive action to exploit. Iran simply needs to create credible uncertainty about whether the strait will remain open. Every time tensions rise between Washington and Tehran, global oil markets respond immediately. Insurance premiums for shipping through the Gulf rise. Tanker operators demand higher rates. Oil importing countries accelerate strategic reserve purchases. The economic ripple from Iranian threats alone, without a single shot fired, imposes billions of dollars of costs on the global economy and forces the United States to deploy additional naval assets to the region to signal reassurance to allies and markets. The cost of maintaining American naval presence in the Persian Gulf is enormous and permanent. The United States Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, represents a continuous commitment of aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, support vessels, and tens of thousands of personnel operating in one of the most operationally demanding environments on Earth. The annual cost of this presence runs into the tens of billions of dollars when you account for everything from fuel consumption to equipment maintenance to personnel costs to the accelerated wear on naval assets operating in the Gulf's extreme heat and salt environment. Iran does not need to sink an American carrier to impose these costs. It only needs to exist as a credible threat in the region. The presence of Iranian anti-ship missiles, naval mines, submarine capabilities, and fast attack boat swarms forces the United States to maintain a force posture that it would not need to sustain if Iran were not there. Every year that posture continues is another year of tens of billions of dollars draining from an American treasury that is already borrowing 40 cents of every dollar it spends. The second dimension is the proxy cost network. Iran has spent 30 years building and sustaining a network of allied organizations and partner groups across the broader Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, various factions in Iraq, the Houthi movement in Yemen, Palestinian armed groups in Gaza and the West Bank, Syrian military and paramilitary forces. This network is sometimes called the axis of resistance, but from a purely strategic economics perspective, it is something more precise. It is a cost imposition machine. The fundamental economics of this network are staggering in their asymmetry. Iran spends an estimated $1 billion to $2 billion annually sustaining its regional network. A significant sum for Iran, but a manageable one given oil revenues flowing through Chinese financial channels that American sanctions cannot reach. The American response to this network costs orders of magnitude more. Military assistance to Israel runs into the billions annually. American forces in Iraq and Syria cost billions more. The naval deployment to the Red Sea in response to Houthi attacks on shipping, Operation Prosperity Guardian, costs hundreds of millions of dollars monthly in operational expenses alone, not including the cost of the missiles and munitions expended intercepting Houthi drones and missiles. The arithmetic is almost impossible to believe when you state it directly. Iran spends roughly $1 to $2 billion annually on its proxy network. America spends tens of billions of dollars annually responding to that network. The cost ratio is somewhere between 10 to 1 and 20 to 1 in Iran's favor. Iran is buying $10 to $20 of American military expenditure for every dollar it spends. At that exchange rate, Iran does not need to win any individual engagement. It only needs to keep the exchange rate positive and let the cumulative mathematics do the work over time. The Houthi campaign in the Red Sea is the clearest recent demonstration of this economics. Houthi forces, equipped with relatively inexpensive Iranian-supplied drones and missiles costing tens of thousands of dollars each, began targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea following the Gaza conflict in late 2023. The American military response involved intercepting these threats using missiles costing between $1 million and $4 million each. In some engagements, American destroyers fired multi-million-dollar missiles to intercept drones, costing a small fraction of that amount. The cost-exchange ratio in individual engagements sometimes ran 100 to 1 or higher in the Houthis' favor. Multiply that exchange ratio across months of continuous operations, and the financial drain becomes strategically significant. Then, add the cost of rerouting global shipping around Africa to avoid the Red Sea, adding roughly 10 days and enormous fuel costs to thousands of voyages. Then add the knock-on effects on global supply chains and insurance markets. The total economic cost of the Houthi Red Sea campaign, which Iran enabled and supported at relatively modest direct cost, runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars when you aggregate all the effects across global trade. The third dimension is the nuclear ambiguity strategy. Iran has never confirmed that it is building a nuclear weapon. It has also never definitively proven that it is not. This ambiguity is not accidental. It is one of the most sophisticated applications of strategic uncertainty in modern geopolitics, and it imposes enormous and continuous costs on American foreign policy and military planning. Maintaining uncertainty about Iranian nuclear intentions forces the United States to sustain military capabilities and force postures designed for a nuclear-capable Iran, whether or not Iran actually reaches that capability. It forces American diplomats to expend enormous political capital managing Israeli concerns about Iranian nuclear progress. It forces the American intelligence community to dedicate significant resources to continuous monitoring of Iranian nuclear facilities. It forces repeated diplomatic crises, negotiations, sanctions, packages, and congressional battles that consume political bandwidth and generate domestic political costs regardless of their outcome. Each round of nuclear diplomacy that fails, and most of them have failed, strengthens domestic American political factions that demand more aggressive action, which generates more military expenditure, more regional deployments, more alliance management costs. Each round that partially succeeds requires ongoing monitoring, verification, and political maintenance that consumes resources indefinitely. The ambiguity itself is the weapon. Iran does not need to actually build a bomb to impose the costs that the possibility of a bomb generates. The fourth dimension is the dollar erosion strategy. This dimension connects directly to what China is building at the infrastructure level, but Iran contributes to it through a specific mechanism that deserves separate analysis. Every time Washington imposes new sanctions on Iran, it sends a signal to every country in the world that dollar-denominated financial infrastructure is a political weapon rather than neutral economic infrastructure. That signal accumulates over time into a structural incentive for countries to reduce their dollar dependence as a matter of national economic security. Iran has been the primary demonstration case for this dynamic for 4 decades. 40 years of watching what America does to a country it designates as an adversary has taught every government on earth that dollar dependence creates strategic vulnerability. The countries most motivated to build alternatives are precisely the countries that have watched Iran most carefully. And the alternatives they are building, the yuan swap agreements, the CIPS connections, the digital currency infrastructure, the gold settlement mechanisms, are collectively eroding the dollar's reserve status in ways that increase American borrowing costs and reduce the fiscal space available for military spending. Iran did not design this mechanism, but Iranian survival under maximum dollar warfare is the proof of concept that made the mechanism credible. Every year Iran survives sanctions is another year of evidence that dollar alternatives work, and every country that acts on that evidence reduces American financial power by a small but cumulative amount. The fifth dimension is the political fracture strategy. This is the most subtle dimension, and the one that American strategic culture is least equipped to recognize or defend against. Iran understands that American democracy has an inherent vulnerability that authoritarian systems do not share. Domestic political disagreement can paralyze foreign policy in ways that no external adversary can achieve through direct pressure. And the costs of military engagement, in lives, in money, in political capital, are publicly visible and politically combustible in ways that make sustained commitment to distant conflicts extremely difficult. Iran's strategy is calibrated to keep American engagement in the Middle East at precisely the level that maximizes domestic American political fracture without triggering the kind of direct attack on American personnel or territory that might unify public opinion behind escalation. Keep the costs high enough to generate continuous domestic debate about whether the engagement is worth it. Keep the provocations below the threshold that would force a decisive American response. Maintain enough regional instability to require continuous American attention and resources without providing the clear casus belli that would justify the political costs of major military action. This calibration has been remarkably successful. The American political debate about Middle East engagement has been continuous, fractious, and unresolved for over 2 decades. Hundreds of billions of dollars have been spent. Thousands of American lives have been lost. And the strategic situation in the region has moved in Iran's favor rather than America's across almost every meaningful metric during that period. Now bring all 5 dimensions together and look at the aggregate effect on American fiscal and strategic capacity. The Gulf naval presence costs tens of billions annually. The proxy network response costs tens of billions more. The nuclear ambiguity management costs billions in intelligence, diplomacy, and military preparedness. The dollar erosion accelerated by Iranian sanctions, survival is raising American borrowing costs by amounts that will compound into trillions over coming decades. And the political fracture generated by continuous Middle East engagement reduces the domestic political capacity for the kind of strategic coherence that managing a serious great power competition with China would require. None of these costs requires Iran to fire a single missile at American territory. None of them requires an Iranian soldier to engage an American soldier directly. All of them are being imposed continuously, simultaneously, and at a cost to Iran that is a small fraction of the cost being imposed on America. The bankruptcy Iran is pursuing is not the dramatic overnight collapse of the American economy. It is the slow, grinding exhaustion of American strategic resources across multiple theaters simultaneously, until the gap between American commitments and American capacity becomes too large to manage. Until allies start making their own accommodations with regional realities because American guarantees are no longer fully credible. Until the domestic American political system can no longer sustain the consensus needed for active global leadership. until the dollar's borrowing advantage erodes enough to make the fiscal mathematics of global military presence genuinely unsustainable. That process is not happening in the future. It is happening now. The numbers are in the public record. The trends are visible to anyone willing to read them without the filter of American exceptionalism. The fiscal trajectory of the United States government, the erosion of dollar reserve status, the rising cost of Middle East engagement, the political fracture over foreign policy commitments, these are not hypothetical future risks. They are present realities that are measurably worsening year by year. Iran did not create American debt. Iran did not offshore American manufacturing. Iran did not fracture American domestic politics. Iran did not build the political conditions that make sustained foreign policy commitment increasingly difficult. America did all of those things through its own decisions over its own decades. What Iran did was study those self-inflicted wounds with extraordinary patience and precision, map them, understand their dynamics, and develop a strategy to press on them continuously at minimal cost until the cumulative pressure produces the strategic outcome Tehran has been pursuing since 1979. A Middle East where American power is no longer the dominant organizing reality, where Iran operates as a major regional power without the constant threat of American military or financial destruction hanging over every decision, where the costs of challenging Iranian regional influence exceed what any American administration can sustain politically or fiscally. That outcome does not require a single Iranian missile to reach American soil. It only requires America to keep doing what it has been doing, spending more than it can afford, committing to more than it can sustain, responding to every Iranian provocation at 10 times the cost Iran paid to generate it. The bankruptcy strategy is not a plan for some future conflict. It is the conflict. It has been running for 40 years. And the score, measured in dollars spent, in strategic positions lost, in credibility eroded, and in fiscal capacity consumed, is not nearly as favorable to Washington as American political rhetoric suggests. Iran doesn't need a single missile. It never did.